What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about the Indian independence movement? Perhaps an image of Gandhi spinning his wheel, leading marches, and slogans like do or die. The association of Indian independence movement with Gandhi is an open piece of propaganda parroted by the West through various means. But what if I told you that 23 years before Gandhi returned from South Africa, a quiet government stenographer named Jatindranath Mukherjee was already waging war against the British Empire? Not with charkhas or the feeble philosophy of non-violence, but with arms, ammunition, and a military plan so daring that if it had succeeded, it would have marked the end of British rule 2 decades earlier in India. Picture this: September 9, 1915. British India is sending troops to fight Germany in World War I. But on a remote beach in Balasore, Odisha, a German ship called SS Maverick is attempting to land some 11,000 rifles along with ammunition for Indian revolutionaries. The man coordinating this audacious plot? That same quiet stenographer in the Bengal government, now known as Bagha Jatin. Long before Ahimsa became famous and associated with independence movement, Bagha Jatin showed that there was another path, one written in blood, gunpowder, and unwavering service to motherland. This episode is his story, a story which they erased from your history books. Picture Bengal in 1880s, a land where diseases like cholera swept through Indian villages like wildfire, while British officials sipped tea in their hill stations, safely removed from these diseases that proper sanitation could have prevented. The Raj had money for grand mansions and railway stations, but somehow never enough for clean water in Indian neighborhoods. In this world lived Umesh Chandra Mukherjee and his wife Sharat Shashi in the village of Kushtia, now part of Bangladesh. Umesh Chandra was known for his uncompromising honesty, once refusing lucrative work with indigo planters because of their cruelties to farmers. Sharat Shashi was equally principled, educated, pious, and devoted to selfless service of others. When their son Jatindranath was born in 1879, Sharat did something that would unknowingly shake an empire. She told him stories, not fairy tales, but the Ramayana and Mahabharata, tales of Ram's unwavering dharma, Arjun's moral courage, Bhim's strength in battle. Through these stories, she wasn't just entertaining her son, she was proving that his ancestors were heroes, not the backward natives his future British textbooks would describe. Then, cholera struck their village. True to her nature, Sharat went door to door, nursing the sick with her own hands, sharing their contaminated water, breathing their infected air. She died as she had lived, in service to others, Dharma personified. But Jatin didn't break. The fearlessness his mother had shown in facing death was already in his blood. One day, when an unruly horse came galloping towards a playing child, 10-year-old Jatin didn't hesitate. He crouched, waited until the horse passed, and then sprang onto its back and brought it under control. His bravery made him famous throughout the village. The boy, who would grow up to challenge an empire, was already showing the world who he was. By 1898, this fearless young man was ready for the next chapter of his story, one that would begin with a train pulling into Calcutta station. The year is 1898. A young Jatin steps through a white cloud of steam issuing from the steam engine of a train as it shudders to a stop in the Howrah station. The sticky heat of Calcutta clings to him like a wet blanket. He walks out of the station and is met with a wall of chaos. Horses neighing and clattering on the cobblestone streets, British sahibs barking out orders in crisp, arrogant English, and the hawking of street vendors in Bengali. It is nightfall by the time Jatin alights from his carriage at the steps of Calcutta Central College in the heart of the city. Already he has the distaste of British creeping up in his heart, and the university gates are a stark reminder that this college education is nothing more than a colonial tool to keep Indians enslaved. As he walks through the gates of the college, he resolves to free himself economically at the earliest opportunity. Bengal of those years was a city of contrasts. On one hand, there was the British quarter, with its well laid out roads, electric bulbs in street lamps, and cobblestone pavements. Fort William stood as a massive palace through which sahibs could command a great view of Calcutta. On the other hand, there was the Indian quarter, with its unplanned and unpaved road, shanties of poor workmen that had sprung up without any prior planning. The only light in this quarter came from oil lamps hung outside these shanties. Jatin travelled along these quarters during his study, and the resolve to drive the British out from his country grew steadily stronger. One day, he found himself at Howrah station where he encounters this crying kid who wants water, but his father is helpless since the train is due to leave in a couple of minutes. Without hesitation, Jatin offers his help and runs to get water for the kid. As he came back, his path was blocked by three English officers who pushed him back and arrogantly sniggered. Most Indians had been conditioned to accept this kind of humiliation on a daily basis. However, Jatin was no ordinary Indian. He sprang up and single handedly beat the living daylights out of all three officers. So intimidated was the government that no charges were filed against him because if it got out that an Indian had beat not one but three English army officers single handedly, other Indian people would also begin to get similar ideas. For Jatin, however, this was a small incident. He was more concerned about getting an opportunity to do real work for getting rid of these Firangs. Unknown to Jatin at that time, wheels were already in motion. Fed up with the passive and often submissive attitude of Congress towards the British, Bengali leaders like Aurobindo Ghosh had begun establishing secret societies in the form of open air gyms in various parts of Calcutta. On the outside, these appeared as ordinary gyms for young Indian men to train their bodies in traditional martial arts like wrestling. Their real purpose was to train the youth in martial skills for fighting against the British. They also provided interested young men access to a network of other revolutionaries. Aurobindo Ghosh went further and established bomb making facilities adjacent to these gymnasiums. The goal of these societies was clear: overthrow the British through violent means. Meanwhile, Jatin encountered Sister Nivedita, a key revolutionary figure who was active in Bengal. She was very impressed with Jatin's dedication to providing selfless service even when he was busy taking a stenographer course or working as a clerk in Bengal government. She introduced him to Swami Vivekananda, and his powerful words added fuel to the already raging fire in Jatin's heart. Recognizing this, Swami Vivekananda asked Jatin to meet Aurobindo Ghosh. This meeting would mark a turning point in his life. You know, there are times when you meet someone and go, where was this person all along? Well, this is what happened when Jatin met Aurobindo Ghosh, since he had been looking desperately for someone with a natural leadership ability to turn the secret society charter into action. For Jatin, this was the opportunity he also was desperately waiting for since many years. Given plenty of planning latitude, Jatin began expanding these underground societies to every corner of Bengal. It was the start of his two faced life, a pleasant government clerk working in the Bengal government by day, and a revolutionary at the service of his country by night. Jatin did something that no one had thought before. He organized these societies into distinct cells that were joined by the same mission, but each had their own way of planning and execution. He made sure that each society had their own leader. The idea was to ensure that any plan of the revolutionary activity would go ahead even if one or two leaders were caught. Probably he himself didn't know at that time, but it was an innovation that would prove to be invaluable to him at many times in the near future. For months, Jatin had been fighting his war in shadows. Secret meetings, coded messages, careful recruitment. But revolutionary work demands balance, and after endless nights of work, he needed some family time. Little did he realize that this trip back home would make him famous all across Bengal. When Jatin arrived in his village, he was surprised to see villagers shutting themselves up in their homes after dark. Curious, he asked his sister about the strange behavior of villagers, who told him that a royal Bengal tiger had been sighted near the village. One day, Jatin and his friends were out strolling near the edge of the forest, enjoying the sounds of nature, when suddenly the entire forest fell eerily silent. A faint rustling in the nearby bush alerted them to the presence of someone hiding there. A moment later, the tiger emerged from the bushes, snarling at them. While retreating, one of Jatin's friends fell flat after he hit a rock. It would have meant a sure death sentence for the friend. However, the tiger had not accounted for one factor in this hunt. One of his prey would fight back. Jatin was only armed with a dagger, but seeing his friend in mortal danger, he fell upon the tiger and engaged in a ferocious battle with it for more than 6 hours. Both Jatin and the tiger were getting exhausted when Jatin, with one final effort, plunged the dagger into its neck. He was treated by a surgeon who made the story popular. In fact, it got so popular that the government of Bengal gave a silver shield commemorating his bravery. After this incident, he was popularly known as Bagha Jatin. It was a name that one day would come to represent the revolutionary spirit of Bengal. On October 16th, 1905, Lord Curzon put his pen on a document that he believed will strengthen British rule in India. With a few strokes of his pen, he partitions Bengal into two provinces. On the surface, it was done to enhance administrative efficiency. The real purpose was to divide and rule Hindu and Muslim populations in order to prevent a repeat of the 1857 revolution. The Congress, as usual, could only muster weak petitions and requests to Curzon to reconsider this partition. However, most of Bengal and the rest of the nation was very angry. It led to massive protests and the birth of the Swadeshi movement. You must be familiar with the brand Borolin, but perhaps you didn't know that it was created as part of a Swadeshi movement to hit the markets of Britain hard, who used to sell cheap medicines in Britain at a very high rate in India. Jatin was watching these events unfold from his sickbed and was itching to get back to action. Finally, 6 months after his battle with the tiger, he stepped back in Calcutta, and the first order of business was to send assassins to deal with Lord Curzon himself. The plan failed, but Jatin was not the one to back down. He created various student cooperative stores for providing access to Swadeshi goods. These cooperatives also had two main objectives. First, they wanted to raise money, and then they wanted to recruit interested youth into his underground organization. Jatin was quietly and steadily expanding his organized revolutionary network right under the nose of British. Unknown to both Jatin and British, the opening salvo of the new age of revolution would come from two ordinary looking teenage boys in 1908. Prafulla Chakki and Khudiram Bose hurled bombs in a carriage they thought was carrying a magistrate called Douglas Kingsford. They did not know that it was the wrong carriage and only contained two innocent English women. Prafulla Chakki committed suicide and Khudiram Bose was arrested and hanged. He became the youngest revolutionary to die in the War of Independence. Other members of Jatin's party were also arrested, including Aurobindo Ghosh, but thanks to the decentralized nature of Jatin's organization, the British could not arrest Jatin. The arrest of a big leader like Aurobindo Ghosh stunned the revolutionaries. Although he was acquitted, Aurobindo Ghosh retired from active revolutionary service and handed the responsibility to Jatin. Jatin grasps that the arrests had demoralized several revolutionaries, and it was a critical juncture for the movement. He knew that if he showed any hesitation or second thoughts, the entire movement would evaporate overnight. Looking critically at the situation, he realized there were three immediate things that needed to be done. First, he needed to get more people involved in the movement. Second, he needed more funds. And third, he wanted to demonstrate that the revolutionary movement in Bengal was far from being dead. Seeing what the stakes were, Jatin went into a frenzy of action. He traveled outside Bengal and set up revolutionary societies in parts of UP and Odisha. Then, he orchestrated several daring daylight robberies to gather the necessary funds. However, to Jatin's mind, these were sideshows. He desperately wanted to find the people responsible for threatening the revolutionary movement. Throughout Indian history, we have had internal traitors who have helped foreign powers rule over us. In case of Prafulla Chakki and Khudiram Bose, there were many such traitors. Through his vast network, Jatin had already identified them. He began planning meticulous operations to execute them publicly. The message this time would be clear. You come after us, and we come after you, no matter wherever you are. The first on this list was Naren Goswami. He had turned approver for identifying Khudiram Bose to the British. He was murdered in his cell right under British nose in August 1908. Then, in November of same year, Nandlal Banerjee was shot dead in Calcutta because he arrested Prafulla Chakki. However, the two British servants who prosecuted them were still roaming free and were almost always under guard. These two were Ashutosh Bishwas, the public prosecutor, and Shamsul Alam, an intelligence officer in Bengal police. Jatin knew that any kind of retribution would be incomplete if these two were still alive. He bided his time, and in February 1909, his agents shot and killed Biswas in the High Court compound. Shamshul was a little bit more careful and he took precautions after this daring murder, but there was no escape from him as well. The next year, in January, he too was shot dead in Calcutta High Court compound. You might be wondering, okay, so he killed a few people in revenge. Why should it bother British Sahibs? The problem for British was not that a few people were killed. The problem was that they were targeted killings and they created an atmosphere where the British felt the ground burning underneath their feet. In fact, they were so shaken up by these assassinations that the British Viceroy Lord Minto had declared openly, "A spirit unknown to India has taken hold, a spirit of anarchy and lawlessness which seeks to subvert not only the British rule but the government of Indian chiefs." This is evidence that Jatin's methods were working and the British day by day were growing fearful. In fact, some of the people actually conjecture this, that it was Jatin's methods that made British change their capital from Bengal to Delhi. Their life was not made easy by Jatin because soon after this, Jatin introduced the novel method of taxi cab robberies. In the same January, when Shamshul was killed, the police arrested many revolutionaries, including Jatin. This case was called the Howrah-Shibpur conspiracy case. The decentralized nature of these underground organizations once again proved to be a key innovation. Jatin walked free after a short jail term of only 1 year due to lack of evidence. During his time in jail, Jatin meditated on what he and Aurobindo Ghosh often discussed. In order for any revolution to succeed against the British, the Indian officers in the British Army must be enticed over to the side of revolutionaries. Without the backing of this army, the British rule would collapse like a house of cards. When Jatin came out of jail, he found that he had been dismissed from his government job. He then started a contract business for railways. It was the perfect cover for him to travel up and down the area on horseback and strengthen the organization in different areas. During these travels, Jatin often found his mind drifting to a document he read in jail. It concerned the onset of a war in Europe in near future. If such a war did break out, then taking advantage of the situation, his revolutionary network could stage a massive revolution to completely remove the British once and for all. Traveling along the marshy tracks in forests of Bengal and Odisha, Jatin began to conceive a plan whose objective was not to shake the foundation of British Raj, but to remove them completely from Bharat. Sometimes, when you embark on a bold journey, fortune often rewards you with a sign that you are on the right track. This happened to Jatin when in 1912 the German crown prince paid a visit to India. He met the prince and managed to extract a promise that Germany would supply arms and ammunition to Indian revolutionaries in order to overthrow the British rule. Jatin continued his social work by training youth in military discipline, helping set up small cottage industries, and often acting in plays depicting the greatness of Bharat. When the Damodar River flooded, he immediately acted to provide relief work. It was here he met another like-minded but down on his luck revolutionary. His name was Raj Behari Bose. Yes, this was the same Raj Behari Bose who would one day welcome Subhash Chandra Bose in Japan. Raj Behari was immediately inspired by energy, craftiness, and relentlessness of Jatin, and like several others before him, fell under his spell. Jatin had been formulating a plan to entice Indian soldiers in the British Army over to his side. At night, He would sneak in Fort William under the cover of darkness and converse with Indian soldiers stationed there. This way, he got first hand intel of the problems that Indian soldiers faced in the British Army. He successfully used these disagreements to entice soldiers to his cause. In fact, he was so successful that he managed to win over the 16th Rajput Regiment stationed at Fort William. The war clouds gathered quicker than anticipated in Europe. World War I started in 1914, and Jatin knew it was now or never. He knew British were watching his movements within Bengal, but what the British didn't know was that for the last couple of years, Jatin was building a network that stretched far outside Bengal and even India itself. He sent messengers to Europe and US, where revolutionaries like Lala Hardayal were organizing students and NRIs in the Ghadar party. Their objective was also similar to Jatin's. These messengers met each other in Berlin and realized that since their goal was same, they should join forces. The Joint Committee of Revolutionaries conducted a treaty with the German government, and it was called Plan Zimmermann. Plan Zimmermann was a 15-point treaty through which Germany agreed to provide arms, explosives, and training to aid the Indian independence movement. With war in Europe only increasing in intensity, many Ghadar party members began trickling back to India to participate in the upcoming revolution. These were hot-blooded Sikh warriors itching to do their bit for the motherland. Seeing that the momentum of the planned revolution was at stake, Raj Bihari Bose convinced Jatin to set a date for the revolution. After much debate and with great reluctance, they arrived at one date, 21st February 1915. Jatin threw himself in readying the necessary support for the planned revolution, while Raj Bihari Bose renewed his efforts to entice Indian army regiments over to their side. Messengers were sent to US to contact Germans and obtain a consignment of weapons and ammunition. German authorities in turn approved 11,000 rifles, 4 million rounds of ammunition, and 250 Mauser pistols with 500 revolvers. Raj Bihari Bose, meanwhile, was convincing Indian soldiers to start the revolution. The plan was that Indian soldiers in the Punjab regiment and the Rajput regiment would capture their officers during roll call and declare the start of the revolution. On the day before this grand revolution, Raj Bihari Bose was ecstatic. He would finally be able to deliver Bharat from these white phalanx. The wheels of the Hindu-German conspiracy were now in motion. As Germans carefully loaded arms into the hull of SS Maverick on the California coast, the destruction of everything Jatin had built was unfolding in a cramped New York apartment. The British had been hunting shadows since early 1914. They knew something was coming. They could feel it in the air, sense it in the energy of Bengali revolutionaries. But what and when? Desperate, they sent their best intelligence officer racing across continents, following Jatin's messengers like a bloodhound. The trail led to New York City, where it vanished into the urban maze. The British agent was lost, frustrated, running out of leads. But sometimes, the most dangerous enemies are the ones you never see coming. In a modest house where Indian revolutionaries gathered to plan their nation's liberation, a Czech housekeeper was quietly cleaning dishes and listening to every detail of the conspiracy that would shake the British Empire. This man wasn't just a housekeeper. He was part of a spy network led by Emanuel Victor Voska, a man who would one day found Czechoslovakia, but right now had one burning hatred: Germany. When the housekeeper reported what he'd overheard, Voska didn't hesitate. He contacted the very British agent who had been chasing ghosts in New York streets and handed him everything: names, dates, shipping routes. The entire conspiracy was laid bare before the British. Within hours, coded messages raced across telegraph lines. The British quietly ordered the entire east coast of India blockaded. SS Maverick and her sister ships carrying the hopes of Indian freedom were surrounded near Indonesia by Dutch vessels acting on British intelligence. Raj Bihari Bose's plan also met with failure. Someone from among the Indian Army soldiers complained to the British, and the participants in this plot were arrested on the morning of the revolt. Sensing the British will be after him, Raj Bihari Bose escaped to Japan, where he desperately tried to have the consignment of arms delivered to Jatin and his comrades. The plan too was foiled when the shipment was captured near Shanghai. It took the combined forces of 7 allied nations to stop a grand plan conceived and planned by one daring man. All because a Czech housekeeper could not keep his mouth shut. Sometimes the twists of fate are truly, truly cruel. Rain pattered down the muddy trench in which Jatin sat, churning the earth into small puddles. He stared into the dark forest, his mind on the events of past months. He remembered one of his friends rushing to inform him that British had got wind of their plan. For months, he and his companions Chittapriya Chaudhary, Manoranjan Sen Gupta, Narendranath Das Gupta, and Chandrapal had trekked through the marshy land of Balasore, often hungry and thirsty. British police, headed by Officer Teagard, along with a cantonment of soldiers at Chandrabali, were closing their net on them. Balasore was sealed from all directions. Anguish shot through Jatin like a painful bullet as he realized that all his work for his motherland had gone in vain. As dawn broke, he became alert of movement coming from the far end of the clearing. He quietly roused his comrades and attached the shoulder stock to his Mauser pistol. The battle with British would soon begin. The British had numerical superiority, but they knew that their opponent was no ordinary man. He was known as Bagha, and he wasn't just going to roll over and die. Moreover, their intel was flawed. Mauser pistols were not revolvers and were actually submachine guns. With a shoulder stock, these submachine guns could fire very accurately. The battle, which should have lasted a couple of minutes, these were only 5 revolutionaries and there were hundreds of police people, actually ended up lasting 75 minutes. By that time, several policemen were dead and Chittapriya was killed. Jatin was struck by bullets multiple times and was seriously wounded. He died the next day in Balasore Hospital, but not before taking full responsibility of the revolutionary actions and telling the other 2 of his saved associates had nothing to do with it. There are a few personalities in history who have had the honor of their adversaries' respect. The British stood in awe of this man who single-handedly and without any financial backing had dared to challenge them. It is a sad part of our history that the contribution of this great man were largely forgotten due to the incompetence of historians and kowtowing by them to one particular ideology. His mention was removed in any textbook or history book of note. The reason is pretty clear. If Jatin's plan had succeeded, he would have become the true father of the nation and India would have become Bharat by 1915.